A quick reminder of what we're doing here. We are doing commentaries on two different but somewhat related humorous books about English history. There are two separate but intertwined series. 1066 and All That are the odd numbered episodes, and Comic History of England are the even numbers. So this is number 2 of the second series and number 4 of the combined series. The two timelines run as parallel as we can make them. Everything clear? No? Well, don't worry. These books don't make a lot of sense anyway. Chapter 2, The Various Roman Yokes, Their Growth, Degeneration, and Final Elimination. Agricola no doubt made the Roman yoke easier upon the necks of the conquered people and suggested the rotation of crops. He also invaded Caledonia and captured quite a number of Scotchmen, whom he took home and domesticated.
There are those who say Scotsmen still haven't been domesticated, and it's Scots, not Scotch. The only things Scotch are tape and whiskey, never people or their country. I think Clarence pointed this out previously, but it's worth repeating.
Afterwards, in 121 AD, the Emperor Hadrian was compelled to build a wall to keep out the still unconquered Caledonians. This is called the Picts' Wall, and a portion of it still exists.
The 1066 guys, in their usual misguided attempt at humor, credited the wall to the Roman Emperor Balbus, who never existed.
Later, in 208 AD, Severus built a solid wall of stone along this line, and for 70 years there was peace between the two nations. Towards the end of the 3rd century, Heraclius, who was appointed to the thankless task of destroying the Saxon pirates.
There were no Saxons in Britain at that time.
Shook off his allegiance to the Emperor Diocletian, joined the pirates, and turned out Diocletian, usurping the business management of Britain for some years. But alas, he was soon assassinated by one of his own officers before he could call for help, and the assassin succeeded him. In those days, assassination and inauguration seemed to go hand in hand. After Constantius, who died 306 AD, came Constantine the Great, his son by a British princess.
Seller and Yateman then skipped over the next 200 years or so because they couldn't think of anything funny to say.
Under Constantine, peace again reigned, but the Irish, who desired to free Ireland, even if they had to go abroad and neglect their business for that purpose, used to invade Constantine's territory, getting him up at all hours of the night and demanding that he should free Ireland.
1700 years and nothing has changed.
Now, these men were then called Picts, hence the expression picked men. They annoyed Constantine by coming over and trying to introduce home rule into the home of the total stranger. The Scots also made turbulent times by harassing Constantine and seeking to introduce their ultra-religious belief at the muzzle of the cross-gun.
We've covered the Picts, Scots, Irish conundrum before, but here are the highlights. Picts inhabited the far northeast of the island of Britain. No one is really sure where they came from or when. To their southwest were the Gaels, who later were called Scots, who were immigrants from Ireland. The Irish were Celts who immigrated from mainland Europe. The Picts and Scots, after decades of disagreements, joined forces to fight off the Vikings. They eventually officially joined together as the Kingdom of Alba, which gradually became Scotland. There are hundreds of books if you want to learn more. There's no such thing as a crossgun, as a weapon at least. It is the name of a brand of so-called silencers for semi-automatic weapons, a dog breed, and a townland in Dublin, Ireland. A townland is much like a township, only much, much smaller.
Trouble now came in the latter part of the 4th century AD, caused by the return of the regular Roman army, which went back to Rome to defend the imperial city, from the Goths, who sought to, quote, stable their stock in the palace of the Caesars, unquote, as the historian so tersely puts it.
What historian?
In 1918 AD, the Roman forces came up to London for the summer and repelled the Scots and Picts, but soon returned to Rome, leaving the provincial people of London with disdain. Many of the Roman officers, while in Britain, had their clothes made in Rome, and some even had their linen returned every 30 days and washed in the Tiber.
There's no evidence of this, of course.
In 466 AD, the Britons were extremely unhappy. Quote, the barbarians throw us into the sea, and the sea returns us to the barbarians, unquote. They ejaculated in their petition to the conquering Romans.
No evidence of this either.
But the latter were too busy fighting the Huns to send troops, and in desperation the Britons formed an alliance with Hengist and Horsa, two Saxon traveling men who in 449 AD landed on the island of Thanet and thus ended the Roman domination over Britain.
Ah, yes, the stallion and the horse. Our previous 1066 episode goes into this in some detail, so I don't have to. Yeah, the Romans had already left, so they didn't end the Roman domination.
The Saxons were at that time a coarse people. They did not allow etiquette to interfere with their methods of taking refreshment, and though it pains the historian at all times to speak unkindly of his ancestors, who have now passed on to their reward, he is compelled to admit that, as a people, the Saxons may be truly characterized as a great national appetite. During the palmy days when Rome superintended the collecting of customs and regulated the formation of corporations, the mining and smelting of ore were extensively carried on, and the walking delegate was invented.
The rest of this chapter varies between nonsense and gibberish, especially the financial bits, and the jump back 300 years to the introduction of Christianity.
Rome, no doubt, did much for England, for at that time the imperial city had 384 streets, 56,567 palaces, 80 golden statues, 2,785 bronze statues of former emperors and officers, 41 theaters, 2,291 prisons, and 2,300 perfumery stores. She was in the full flood of her prosperity and had about 4 million inhabitants. In those days, a Roman senator could not live on less than $80,000 per year, and Marcus Antonius, who owed $1,500,000 on his inaugural, March 15th, paid it up March 17th, and afterwards cleared $720,000. This he did by the strictest economy, which he managed to have attended to by the peasantry. Even a literary man in Rome could amass property, and Seneca died worth $12 million. Those were the flush times in Rome, and England, no doubt, was greatly benefited thereby. But alas, money matters became scarce, and the poor Briton was forced to associate with the delirium tremens and massive digestion of the Saxon, who floated in a vast ocean of lard and wassail during his waking hours and slept with the cunning little piglets at night. His earthen floors were carpeted with straw and frescoed with bones. Let us not swell with pride as we refer to our ancestors, whose lives were marked by an eternal combat between malignant alcoholism and trichinosis. Many a Saxon would have filled a drunkard's grave, but wobbled so in his gait that he walked past it and missed it. To drink from the skulls of their dead enemies was a part of their religion, and there were no heretics among them. Footnote: the artist has very ably shown here a devoted little band of Saxons holding services in a basement. In referring to it as a basement, not the slightest idea of casting contumely or obloquy on our ancestors is intended by the humble writer of pungent but sometimes unpalatable truth.
Not to mention unpronounceable and incomprehensible.
End of note. Christianity was introduced into Britain during the 2nd century, and later, under Diocletian, the Christians were greatly persecuted. Christianity did not come from Rome, it is said, but from Gaul. Among the martyrs in those days was St. Alban, who had been converted by a fugitive priest. The story of his life and death is familiar. The Bible had been translated, and in 318 AD, Britain had 3 bishops of London, Lincoln, and York. The end of either part 2 or part 4, and depending on where you're counting from. Regardless, the next episode will return to 1066 and all that, taking on chapters 3 and 4, dealing with some religious stuff and preparations for a Danish invasion. Don't miss it.